This is the Tunisian Eugenic Legacies of the Revolution of 2011 panel. And I'm Shreya. I'm a dual PhD candidate in sociology at Sciences Po in Paris and the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm very excited to present our next panelist, Yasmin Akrimi. So Yasmin Akrimi is a PhD student in political science at Ghent University and a research analyst at the Brussels International Center. Her research focuses on post-colonial processes of racialization and the functioning of contemporary racism in Tunisia and its intersections with gender and notions of national identity and belonging. She will be presenting about the intersection of race, womanhood, and national identity in post-independence Tunisia. The floor is yours, Yasmin.
Thank you, Shreya, and thank you, Benedict, for this. You know, I apart from Emmy, I know everyone here, and I think we've never been in the same panel together. So this is very very interesting. So I'm gonna try to do the presentation in two separate parts. First, I'm gonna give a bit of context about national identity and nationalism in post-independence Tunisia and how national identity was built and its eugenics underpinnings, or at least its racialist underpinnings. And then I'm gonna move to a bit of testimonies from my field work. My first field work was in March of this year. So it's always interesting to connect both. First, I think it would be useful to place the question of identity and difference in Tunisia in a recent historical framework. In my case, it's post-independence, but I know the other panelists will talk about slavery, I think, after that. So the establishment of the Tunisian nation state following the country's independence in 1956 has introduced the sort of unitary political discourse and its corresponding instruments of unification. An attempt was made to avoid any particularism of any kind. And according to this unionist perspective, all the categories of citizens had to be imagined in a single landscape, that of the state. And this unitary performance of national identity really was channeled through one concept, and it's called Tunisianité, which could be translated to Tunisianity or Tunisianness, it depends. And it's a hegemonic understanding of belonging. Fathi Hillel, who's a Tunisian scholar, defines Tunisianité as an ideology, so the belief that Tunisia forms both a nation and a nationalism in its own right because of its unique historical, territorial, linguistic, and socio-cultural specificities. So after he analyzed articles published in Tunisian newspapers post-2011, he concluded to three tendencies in representing Tunisianité. One, the first could be called essentialist, and it claims an unmistakable ethno-linguistic connection to a glorified pre-Arabo-Islamic classicism, which goes back to the foundation of Carthage. And a second, more dominant one, which is still very much prevalent today, construes Tunisianité in assimilationist terms, meaning Tunisia as a melting pot, lumping different Eastern and Western ethno-linguistic and cultural traditions. And then you had a third one emerging, although it's still marginalized, a third one emerging after the 2011 revolution, which followed the Enlightenment revolutionary ideals of democracy, dignity, and freedom. And the latter saw the emergence of the minority question, among which Blackness and Africanity started being advocated as an integral dimension of Tunisianité by anti-racism activists. And I open a small parenthesis here, maybe Huda could talk about that after, but the term minority is itself contested by Black Tunisians because trajectories and genealogies are very different. For example, Tunisian scholar Ines Mradeli argues that Blacks in Tunisia are a visible minority, so they're numerically important enough to be qualified as such. But you cannot, for example, compare the Black experience in Tunisia with the Amazigh or the Jewish experience, because the latter two present either a linguistic or religious particularism, whereas the Black phenotype really does not constitute a proper ethnicity in Tunisia, meaning there are no specific customs, dialects, or aesthetic that all Black Tunisians share, which would make them a separate group. And I think Marta, who's present in this panel, made the same observation in her thesis. Okay, so moving to the eugenistic kind of underpinning of this imagination of identity. Ergin, for example, identifies two principal consequences to the spread of European racialist discourses on the construction of national identity and the othering of certain categories of human beings. The first is what we can call chromatism, which is a fascination with skin color and related physiognomic features. And chromatism really relates to an appropriation and adaptation of European eugenism that spilled into the colonized cultural domain, an ultimate fascination with whiteness and its attributed traits, taste, beauty, intelligence, higher social status. Whiteness itself, and it's very important to understand, is a very stretchable notion that goes beyond the European definition of being white to adapt to local manifestations of power and offer new social groups the range of privileges that come with being recognized as white. And what I argue is that post-independence nationalism in Tunisia had to negotiate that very delicate contradiction between constructing a national identity, a post-colonial national identity, while aiming to join modernity as an equal counterpart to European civilization. Tunisian historian, for example, Driss Abessi, contends there was a firm post-independence political will carried by President Habib Bourguiba, so Tunisia's first post-independence president, and that is still viewed as the father of the nation. There was a firm will to impose a bridge identity between the two shores of the Mediterranean that paradoxically cut Tunisia from another possible bridge crossing the Sahara, which is Africanity. And this is really a continuity of the colonial distancing from the African continent, contrasting with the state's narrative of openness, plurality, and tolerance. And it's foregrounded in a will to distance Tunisian identity from the perceived African Blackness, backwardness, and associated again with Western modernity. And among the pillars of Tunisianité is the concept of la femme tunisienne, so the Tunisian woman, which followed the same modernist logic. And this, femme tunisienne was an integral part of a project of female liberation. Ami talked about that through state institutions, also known as state feminism. And if I could just put, like the specific characteristics of this femme Tunisienne, she is university educated, she works, she is urban, she is secular not as in distancing herself completely from Islam, but not wearing the veil very specifically. And maybe Huda could talk about that after. And she comes from the upper middle class, and I argue she is very often light-skinned. The presentation didn't work, but if you see urban billboards in Tunisia, the overrepresentation of very, very light-skinned European-looking women in everything, in cultural productions, in school textbooks, and in institutional flyers is really very telling. Moving to my fieldwork, I want to just highlight some of the ways the Black women, the Black Tunisian women I talked to are, dealing with race and racism. And this does not necessarily depend on the violence of the racism experience, but the meaning each woman allocates to it. For example, if the racist account is understood beyond an individualistic explanation of the phenomenon and placed, in broader structural historical processes, resilience will differ. Just giving you, small testimonies. For example, one woman I spoke to living in Harram, which is a rural town in southern Tunisia, around 40 kilometers from another big city, Gebes, told me, so basically when she was a child, she did not know she was Black. And her first encounter with her understanding of Blackness is when a neighbor, when she was 5 or 6 years old, told her, "Go away, Black ant," I'm literally transcribing, "may your day be a bearer of bad news." And he would tell her that consistently every time he would see her in the neighborhood. And that was a Quranic tutor, a tutor instructor in a Quranic school. I did not know what it meant, what I had done wrong. I just said hello. Another testimony is her telling that to her mother, for example, and her mother telling her, well, at the end of the day, you are just Black, you are just a Black servant, using that word against her daughter. But just finishing with my conclusion. So basically, there are different trajectories Black Tunisian women have been undertaking to construct a sense of self and belonging, basically, to the national community, in the face of pervasive social racism, really. Stereotypical images of Blackness and a national identity conceptualized as a clothed vessel. Each one resists in her own modalities to the devaluation of Black femininity in Tunisia. So some embrace militant forms of anti-racism, while others believe avoiding talking about race will minimize its impact. And this, at least for me, questions the liberal understanding of agency as a homogeneous matrix to transpose indifferently to every case. So yeah, I don't have a further conclusion, but basically, yeah, that's where I'm going to stop.
Thank you for your presentation. Interesting ideas that I hope that we can come back to. So the next presenter is Marta Scaglioni, who is a postdoc researcher at the University of Milan Bicocca, and holds a co-tutelle PhD from the University of Beirut and the University of Milan. She published her dissertation research on the heritage of slavery in southern Tunisia in the form of a book titled Becoming the Abid Lives and Social Origins of Southern Tunisia, which I highly recommend to everyone, published in 2020. It's available freely online in case people want to read it. Marta will be talking about today about race and racism in southern Tunisia post 2011 challenges. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you. I hope you can hear me well and you can see my PowerPoint. I'm sorry.
Yes.
A little bit late. I'm very happy to be here to talk about the race and racism in Tunisia. It has been like an ongoing debate among us. I will talk mainly about race because it's important. It's a kind of important distinction at the basis of eugenic policies. And my field work concentrates in the southern part of Tunisia. So it comes from a very specific case study. I did my field work from 2014 to 2016. And I was inquiring post-slavery legacies. And I will argue that at the basis of racial distinctions today, there is more the post-abolition period, but pre-colonial period. So my thesis is in that period of time and talks to the two presentations we heard before. So in southern Tunisia, race as a concept is very difficult to grasp because racial distinctions are very far from displaying a homogeneous core, and this is at the basis of what we're talking about, so that minorities don't really have a common identity in Tunisia. It consists, I think, race consists more in various layers. I'm very fond of the metaphor of an onion. Doesn't have a core, but it has various layers, which can be pulled and analyzed along historical and diachronic lines. So I argue that race in southern Tunisia, I did my field research in the governorate of Medellin. So I'm showing a map. I think we are very familiar with that. It is a post-slavery legacy because its development and explanation cannot avoid a reconnection to the history of slavery in the region of Islamic slavery and specifically to the post-abolition period. One of the main arguments of my PhD thesis that Shreya was quoting was that the ethnic boundaries between social and racial categories in southern Tunisia today hardened after abolition. I theorized something called descent constructs, which divide groups vertically rather than horizontally, cutting lines through genealogical continua rather than between synchronic racial groups. So I reconnect my analysis to other analysis in North Africa, for example, Remco Hensel in Morocco, in the Dra River Valley, where racial attribution, and this is similar to southern Tunisia, is defined by genealogical origin more than by mere phenotype, so skin color. Even though, of course, these social groups are assigned a color. So when I came there, of course, colors were present in the discourses, and they were like Iswed, of course, Sud and Suda, Asmar, small, but also, and we are all very familiar with that, also Wasif, meaning servant. So showing how these colors are social colors and are connected to the history of slavery in the region. So similarly to this Moroccan context, and also I reconnect to the work by Shukel Hamel, skin color plays a role in the image and self-image of Southern Black Tunisians, but it's only one of the elements making up their social and racial identity. And so Blacks are racialized as Blacks by means of their skin color, but also by means of their classificatory slave status. I use classificatory because classificatory means, in the words of Benedetta Rossi, means both inherited and putative. Because of course, you may know that if you talk to Black Tunisians in the South, many of them refuse the level of slave descendants and refuse any connection with slavery. The social hierarchy in southern Tunisia is very clear. I understood it very easily when I arrived because it was very present in the discourses. There is the social category of the Ahrar, so we are talking about free men, so there is a connection to slavery. And this social category racializes itself as different from the two socioeconomic inferior categories and racial inferior categories, which are Shuashin and Abid. And Ahrar identify their members as Bidan, so white. So there is a connection here between skin color and classificatory slave or master status in the past. I argue that the genesis of these racial categories, the racial setup of this region was defined by some post-slavery institutions. One of these is WALA. And WALA exemplifies the constructive power of Islamic slavery and post-slavery in this region and in North Africa as a whole. WALA framed free, meaning manumitted, rather than freed by bellical abolition, by bellical decree. It framed these free Black slaves in these regions within an Islamic formal relationship, so that's called WALA, with their former masters, to provide them with affiliation and protection, because living in this region without affiliation, without a nasab, without protection, without a surname in the end, was and still is very difficult and sometimes even dangerous. So in these rural settings, clientelistic ties replaced slavery relationships. And ex-slaves settled down next to the former masters, and that's what happened in the case studies I was working in. These former masters, were the masters, were they not, this is not really important, but they belonged and they still belong to the Ahrar category. And ex-slaves took their lineage name, but adding Shuashin or Abid to it, so creating a fictive familial tie, which was a semi, but never a full belonging. Fictive because there were some differences. Of course, they were strict endogamic lineages, so intermarriages could not happen and still cannot happen. They're very socially prohibited and sanctioned. And a former master could inherit from the former slaves, but the opposite could not happen, for example. And ex-slaves kept exerting part of the former masters for free. For example, when the harvest was very tough, there was a lot of work connected to the harvest, or on ceremonial occasions. And this is something which remains until now. So some Abid and Shuashin perform musical performances in weddings, in Ahrar weddings still today. So I argue that this is similar to many other African contexts. The freedom meant renegotiating belonging rather than radical detachment. So there was still a kind of clientelistic tie. But what is interesting, I think, here is that in contrast to other areas in Africa, for example, Mahmoud Mamdani in Eastern Africa, the historical and political processes of racialization must be disentangled from the colonial history and anchored to the pre-colonial racial setup, because these post-manumission or post-abolition structures occurred well before the colonial encounter. So it's very difficult to understand what race is when one is there in southern Tunisia. But I tried in my PhD thesis and in later work to concentrate on what race does at the level of like daily interactions. And these, I think, like between these lineages, there is something which we can be reconnected to what Charles Tilly defines as categorical inequality, so structural inequality. I will concentrate today on some meanings attached to Blackness, which are connected more to the gender dimension, because I think this is the most interesting part for my audience, and we can like create a debate on that. First, like Blackness, there is an essentialist discourse which naturalizes human differences and ascribes not only physical features, but also cultural and moral qualities. And some of these meanings align with the worldwide racial paradigm, scholarly name Think Blackness. And this is something we are all very familiar with. For example, Blacks as being lazy, violent, prone to crime, especially raping, stealing. However, discourses on Blackness in this region show some peculiarities, and they cannot be compared to Western North Atlantic racial framework, both in the very idea of race as in the meanings attached to race and to Blackness, the declination of race and Blackness. Some very recent statistics, we know that we don't have really many statistics in Tunisia, but there was a statistic in 2018 indicating that Blacks are about 10 percentage points more likely than other Tunisians to live in rural areas. So I work in a very rural area. They are 15 percentage points less likely to own a radio, a car, or a computer. Racial oppression intertwines with class distinction and starts, for example, from educational inequality. Blacks are about 10% less likely to have completed primary school and are almost twice as likely to be unemployed than other Tunisians. And in this region, Shuashin and Abid, as I mentioned, are often relegated to menial works stemming from the legacy of slavery, such as the preparation of weddings, musical careers and jobs connected to magic, the mystic realm. But maybe you are also familiar with the concept of Aris Bilavid, so wedding with the slaves. That is where Black musicians are performing. And these performances often reproduce inequalities and the legacy of slavery. So it is not infrequent to hear Black singers intoning something like, oh, look how lucky you are to Ahrar couples, look how lucky you are to get married to such a white woman. And often they also refer to the bride and the groom as Sidi and Lella, which were terms used in the past where slavery was in force. So education inequality, professional and socioeconomic disparities are also accompanied by, and we have seen it in many denouncements by anti-racist activists, they're accompanied by racist slurs and attacks, so violent attacks. So given the gender, sorry, are you writing me on the, no. 1 minute. So given the gender segregation of space there, like in southern Tunisia, I spent most of my time with women, and I will analyze very briefly what is Blackness for women, for rural women in the south. Blackness is a constant concern, so they attach to it various meaning. It's done? Okay. So I just wanted to talk very briefly about Blackness and how many women are like trying to conceal Blackness. I cannot even do it. But maybe we can talk about it in the discussion time. Sorry for taking up so much time.
Thank you, Marta. This is all very fascinating. I hope we get to come back to your, lightning cream slide. So we are moving to the presentation by Hudam Ziudet. Hudam Ziudet is a student of political science at the University of Toronto. She has worked as a freelance journalist and continues to do research and publish on Libya and Tunisia. She has also been a very important figure in the Black activism movement in Tunisia. And she will be presenting on Invisible No More, digging into racial slavery legacies and the role of transitional justice in Black Tunisians' visibility in post-authoritarian Tunisia. The floor is yours, Hade.
Okay, so my presentation is titled Invisible No More, digging into racial/slavery legacy and the role of transitional justice in Black Tunisia's visibility in post-authoritarian Tunisia. I'm not sure if, okay, there you go. So I'll begin with the highlights of my presentation and the main themes. So there were attempts at history rewriting, reassessment, reappraisal, and the redefining of Tunisianness in post-2011 Tunisia. The issue of colorism in southern Tunisia, which can be situated in the heart of racial politics of miscegenation, racial misidentification, ambiguity, race evasion, etc. The erasure and the invisibilization of Black Tunisians, the quasi-absence of a serious discussion of the taboo question of race in Tunisian public circles, except for a marginal liminal interest from a fringe of Tunisian academia. The Black Tunisian local political engagement with grassroots and local governance work seeking more visibility. And finally, the Tunisian transitional justice process emerging amidst the global Black Lives Matter movement development, echoing historical violations due to slavery legacy, catalyzing Black Tunisian activism as political opportunity driving change in post-revolution Tunisia. So first theme is about rewriting Black Tunisian history or redefining Tunisian identity. With almost 10 to 15% of the Tunisian population, Black Tunisians are considered the elephant in the room in discussing the oft ignored, taken for granted, and the thorny issue of race in Tunisia. Straddles colonial and post-colonial racial hang-ups. Its modern manifestation is rooted in the French legacy of non-racial categorization with the adoption of French Republican universalism and defined citizenship. In fact, Bourguiba adopted the Tunisian identity in the same line as modern Turks' policy of assimilation. Thus, post-slavery Tunisian emancipation of Black slaves and their descendants remains an easy past to deal with. One of the manifestations of Black Tunisian activism was could be seen in 2014 when the marches were started in the south of Tunisia, home to the largest Black Tunisian population by mostly Black activists, with participants calling for the recognition of racial injustice suffered by Black Tunisians since the abolition of slavery in 1846. Unfortunately, the post-independence Tunisian state failed to right the historical wrongs about the legacy of slavery, and whose descendants of disenfranchised Black Tunisians are still treated like second-class citizens and have been made invisible in social, political, economic, and cultural spaces. Unfortunately, the Tunisian Revolution gave impetus to the movement of Black Tunisian women to reclaim pride in being Black, and this was supported by Black activists. They contributed to the resurgence of a discourse on race and identity in a country that had been hermetically sealed off throughout history to any free and democratic debate on the legacy of its authoritarian regime. So here, a few pictures of Black Tunisian activist protest after 2011 with banners, which both in French and Arabic, about giving more dignity and equality to Black Tunisian citizens, but also focusing on being treated equally with dignity. One aspect of the Southern Tunisian slavery legacy is eugenic politics, where Black Tunisians were racialized after emancipation as more or less in the same fashion Blacks in Latin America and the Caribbean had been after abolition in the 19th century, within a racial hierarchical system, including segregation, with the light-skinned versus dark-skinned Blacks and the social acceptance or rejection duality. Slavery and racial legacy served as overlapping notions of the complex understanding and conceptualization of race in Tunisia. There is a post-independence state-sanctioned systemic approach to the erasure and dilution of race and racial issue as non-existence or in connection with regional marginalization, whereby the intersection of race and poverty plagues Black Tunisian population. Moreover, the anti-miscegenation practices across the South dates back to slavery period, with varying degrees from quasi-total segregation and racial mixing ban, as in the island of Jerba, for example, this relative toleration in other southern areas such as Gibeli and Gabis. Alternative, during slavery, Black slave women were taken as concubines by Tunisian men, slaveholders, and fathered mixed-race children. Today, many Black Tunisian men are marrying up white Tunisian women as a form of social upward mobility, resulting in the development of mixed-race Shirkawi. Here I am borrowing from Bidusha, who cited in Scaglione, the mulatto, the mestizo equivalent in Latin America category in southern Tunisian towns and cities. Here also, this missing here. I'm also here referring to, Scaglione referred to the hypo and hyper descent in interracial marriage in southeastern Tunisia in Sidi Makhlouf and Gosba, where she carried out her field work as part of her PhD research. Next theme is about historicizing Black Tunisia. The memorialization of Black Tunisian presence could be part of the reappraisal of Tunisian history and rehabilitation of discriminated Black population and its suppressed history by breaking the racial taboo and the cycle of Tunisian state official denial and invisibilization of Black Tunisians. This can be achieved by doing away with monuments with slave connotation, streets, slave markets, etc. Through the recognition of Black Tunisian figures who fought French colonialism and resisted post-independence marginalization policies, Black Tunisian activists rose after 2011 to highlight Black Tunisian prominent figures such as Slim Marzouk and Nasser Madani. So these are few pictures of Black Tunisian figures. To the right is Slim Marzouk, who Maha Abdel Hamid has written a biography about him and talked to his family as someone who was discriminated against, by the Bourguiba regime, and is considered as a hero in his hometown of Mdou in the south, in the governorate of Gabis in the south of Tunisia. And also in one of the pictures, you have Sadia Musbah, who is a pioneering Black Tunisian activist since 2011, and who comes from a family that has always fought against anti-Black racism in Tunisia. Also, one of the banners, refers to the fact that Tunisia was the first Arab Muslim country to have abolished slavery in 1846, but unfortunately, racism still prevails. The next theme is about transitional justice and Black Tunisian activism, grassroots activism. Black Tunisian activists were drawing attention to the psychological and the social impact of racism through different workshops, events organized by organizations such as Menemti and Adam, two pioneers in the fight against anti-Black racism and the historical legacy of slavery. This includes the symbolic role of the Truth and Dignity Commission in considering the case of Black Tunisians suffering of discrimination as part of the transitional justice process in 2016, when Menemti submitted its file to the commission. So one aspect of Black Tunisian activism, the emergence of Black Tunisian BLM movement during the Arab Spring uprisings, and this invisible community was mobilizing through not only in Tunisia but also globally. And one of the protests, the picture of the protest to the left was in 2016 when an Ivorian was killed in Tunisia, and his assassination sparked protest across in Tunis, where people protested against the violence, especially meted at sub-Saharan African migrants who also suffer doubly from racism in Tunisia, from not only being Black but also from not being Tunisian too. The other theme is about transnational global activism, where Black Tunisian activists have been connecting with international, transnational Black movements and organizations across the world since 2011, in the Western Hemisphere in particular. Indeed, Tunisia hosted the World Social Forum in 2013 and 2015 as one of the most popular gatherings of human rights, indigenous people, and minority group populations in the global South and the global North, and have been building alliances with them, in particular with the Black, French, and Afro-Brazilian activists. There was also the fact that the Me Too movement in Tunisia had its resonance in Tunisia with the feminization of Black Tunisian activism. And here I want to pay tribute to the work of Sadia Musbah and Maha Abdel Hamid. The latter was one of the co-founders of Black Tunisian Women's Voice in 2020. Black Tunisian participation has become the only chance for ambitious Black Tunisians to make themselves more visible and be represented in their communities in the South. And in particular, during the electoral process in 2011, with the election of two Black MPs, Bashir Shamam and Jamila Ksiksi, the Democratic transition also brought awareness about anti-Black racism in Tunisia, which culminated in the passing of Law 250 that criminalized racial discrimination by the Rump Tunisian Parliament in October 2018. Just so we'll move on, these are, I probably will have, there's something about cordial racism, which whereby Islam is principle of equality is being weaponized by many non-white Tunisians as to erase, you know, to erase Black Tunisians and their invisibility. And I will conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda, for your presentation. So now it's my turn. So I'll be presenting on something that it's an idea that I've been playing with. So it's really all raw data that I will be presenting. It's sort of a middle category that I'm trying to understand. The category of wait, let me share the screen. So what I want to talk about today is the category of Hindawiya, which is like the Indianness, right? I mean, so when I want to sort of argue that the category of Hindawiya, so Hindawiya means Indian woman, you know, so Hindawiya it means Indian woman, and Hindawi means like the Indian man. Like, so these are two adjectives in Arabic, in Tunisian Arabic, in Fusha it would be Hindi and Hindiya. So that is also the term that's used. So the term Hindawiya, where does it come from? And sort of what is the motivation behind looking at this question is because when I started to do my research in Tunisia, I would categorically be called Hindawiya, right? And I was always surprised because, I mean, for me, I do pass a lot as a Tunisian woman, but sometimes I do not pass as a Tunisian woman, and people recognize me immediately as someone coming from India. I am Indian. So that sort of made me think, like, you know, what is this category, and like, is it, you know, what does it mean? So for example, when I remember back in 2020, when I would walk around even with a mask on, people would stop me and be like, "Oh, you're Indian," and I would be like, "How do you know with my mask on?" Like, and they'd be like, "Oh, your eyes." And so these kind of like very biologically defined markers that people use to define someone as a Hindawiya or as a body as South Asian, to sort of define a body as South Asian. So that sort of began to intrigue me. And sort of like the placement as well. I mean, I'm always interested in sort of these middle categories of who is Black. Like, you know, you have the social construction of Blackness that Huda and Martha, as well as Yasmin have been talking about. And you have the social construction of Tunisianité that Yasmin did talk about as well, and as well as Amy. So what is this weird category in between, right? So what does it mean to be, and is it racialized, is it gendered, is it classed? I mean, so that is sort of what I want to try to argue, is that it is the category of Hindawiya, like how the South Asian body is constructed in the imagination of Tunisians, but also more broadly in the Middle East and North Africa region, is a category that is racialized, that is classed, as well as gendered. And you have convergences across the region because of the spread of Bollywood, Indian film and soap operas across the regions, but you also have divergences across the region coming from differences in migration regimes across the region. So for example, you have migration regimes from India to the Gulf, whereas you don't have migration regimes from India or South Asia to Tunisia. So that sort of these differences sort of affect this construction, the social construction of Hindawiya. So that is what I'm going to try to look at. So just like a few images to sort of like motivate, like to show that this is actually a thing in Tunisia. So this is an image that I found while I was walking around Bizerte, which is in north of Tunisia. It was a photo studio where I saw this image, of a woman who's like dressed as a, as a quote unquote Hindawiya, as an Indian woman. So when I posted this picture on my social media, I had other Tunisian women tell me that in their childhood it was a thing, so women my age in Tunisia, many of them have pictures that were taken in photo studios that are similar to these, where they would dress up as a Hindawiya. It was sort of considered as a sign. It was considered something as a marker of beauty to dress up as an Indian woman, right? So, and you have like the nukta, what they call the nukta. They call the jewelries that come in, like the red jewelries and stuff like that. So you have this presence in Tunisia, this idea. So, and then there's this other like board that I saw, like, walking around and across Tunisia, you would see like a lot of beauty salons would have images from Bollywood of Indian actresses, like this one, and it actually even has, like this one I found when I was walking around in Morouge in Tunis. And its name is Saundarya, which in Hindi actually means beauty, So you have these like weird ideas of like this construction of Hindawiya. In the Fripe, there's also been an increasing popularity of dressing up as a Hindawiya, and you have like this very like a market of Indian looking clothing in the secondhand market. Clothing markets across Tunisia. So, for example, this is in Hafsia, which is like one of the most popular secondhand clothing spaces, informally organized. And you have this space that are known for selling Indian clothing. And you have this. I found this on Facebook. The selling of Indian hair oil, because there's a social construction of like Sha'r Hindi, which is like the Indian hair, right, which is supposed to be like jet black, straight, glorious. And of course, everyone like compliments me when I walk around and they see that I'm Indian. They'll be like, oh, inti andak Sha'r Hindi, and they're like, oh, you have Indian hair, right? And to sort of say like, oh, you're actually Indian, like it's as if like when I say that I'm Indian, or when they recognize me as Indian, it's like to give legitimacy to the fact that I'm Indian. They would like look at my hair, they would touch my hair and be like, yeah, you really have Indian hair, right? So you have this social construction of Hindawiya, of Hindawiya, specific Hindawiya is a female gendered adjective for Indian woman. And then you have the Hindi. You don't have much. I mean, there isn't a lot of like a very intense construction of like Hindawi, like an Indian man, but you have an intense construction of like a very, very everyday present construction of Indian body, Indian female body in the everyday of Tunisia. So where does this sort of come from? The biggest source in Tunisia, and speaking about Tunisia, would be the Bollywood, which became very popular in the 70s and the 80s. So you have a whole generation of women and men who grew up watching Bollywood films, and who still continue. Many of them continue to watch, Indian soap operas, Bollywood. And Bollywood itself, is a social, has a form of social contagion, as what Yasmin was talking about, Tunisianité, a form of Indianness, which is very nationalistic, is also constructed by Bollywood. So there's a certain way of, there's a very homogeneous way of being Indian that sort of is also portrayed on Bollywood. Which sort of gets captured in Tunisia, which gets captured all across North Africa and around MENA, where Indian films are very popular. So, and gets used to sort of construct what does it mean to be Indian. But then there's also this very biological idea of like, what does it mean to be Indian? There's also like in Tunisia, speaking back again of Tunisia, and I think I want to sort of end there. So as I was saying, like you have these biological markers. And another one is like the skin color. And I ask my interlocutors when I do my interviews, because I'm studying Blackness as well in Tunisia. I ask my interlocutors, so like, how do you define my skin color? And they would say, and there's like a large debate in the use of terms. So like, for example, one woman said that I'm kamhiya, like wheatish. Another person said that I'm Zarga, which is a very negatively connoted term. So Zarga comes, so come here is like wheatish, like brown, dark brownish. It is some, I mean, it depending on the context, it can be interpreted either as neutral or as negatively connoted. You have the term Zarga, and I'm going to sort of end here and with these terms, and then come back to it like in maybe the Q&A session. You have like the term Zarga, which is like very negatively connoted. It comes from the blueness, right? And I was like asking like, but what is blue about my skin? And this person went on to basically tell me that alien skin, like when you like, like you bend and the skin that when it gets bent here, it has a shade of blueness to it. And that is like very specific about alien skin. So you see like you have these like hyper racialized ideas about the social construction of Indianness in Tunisia. It's very gendered as well, as I was saying, like, you have, there's a hypersexuality that is also given to Indian bodies. And it is also classed in the sense like it's sort of, there's this like middle classness, like it's not that sort of comes from this homogeneous construction of Indian womanhood in Bollywood. So I'm going to conclude there. We can come back to like the differences across the MENA region, which are plenty. Voila, thank you. So I think this is the end of all the presentations. Thank you to all the panelists for their presentations. We have about few minutes, I think, to take questions. I mean, I also have a question that I want to sort of put out is the construction of Tunisianité and like the links between Arabness, Tunisianité, and Blackness. Like, how do they mingle? How do they not mingle? Do they overlap? What does it mean to be Arab today? And what does it mean to be? Because you also have like what is Muslimness as well? Because a lot of like a lot of times like Arabness and Muslimness sort of gets conflated. For example, in the Tunisian constitution, you have the fact that like it states that Tunisia is an Arabo-Muslim country. So what is the relationship of so these three terms sort of like get put together, like Arabness, Muslimness, Tunisianness. So what is the space of Blackness here? And it's also like, and there was also someone tweeting recently about the speech, about like speeches of Kais Said, where they said like, there has been an attempt to bring back the Rajalia, the masculinity of Tunisia back. So like Kais Said is going to bring back the masculinity. Then like all these women fighting too much they have too much rights, like it's become a problem. So like sort of to put this question of like, what does, to sort of just what do the study of these margins sort of talk about this like, synonymousness or antonymousness of Tunisianness, Arabness, and Blackness, and if all of you want to sort of talk about it.
Because it's something I always ask myself about, being Tunisian myself and having been raised with like an upper middle class family in the capital Tunis, and having been raised with very little references to Arabness. Muslimness was there, but Arabness in the sense of the belonging to the Arab world, which, very paradoxically, I started feeling a belonging to when I migrated to Belgium. So I saw that imposition of that very much racialized Orientalist also category of you are an Arab. And then I decided to own it. Although in Tunisia, I would, if you ask me what I am, I would say I'm Tunisian. I would rarely reference myself as being Arab. And I think I was looking at the primary textbooks versus secondary textbooks of my generation versus my parents' generation, so the post-independence generation. And for the primary textbooks that, for example, my parents, who today are like between 50 and 60 years old, the primary textbooks, the textbooks in primary school, meaning that they were raised with, In primary school, they referenced only the Mediterranean, component of the Tunisian identity, and that was because it was written by French professors that very much wanted to keep that the neo-colonial link, of the Mare Nostrum, of the link between France and its southern Mediterranean neighbors. And you see that's a rhetoric today with the European Union, for example. And then you move to secondary school, and then you have those textbooks very much referencing Tunisian history, the fight for independence, and then the Arab-Muslim component of Tunisianité. And I think today in Tunisia, it's very telling because it's a class marker who's referencing being an Arab and being, a traditional Muslim, and who's not. And you see it with the French-speaking elite, and maybe, you could comment on that, but like the French-speaking elite, people who were raised in what they call it, the Republican schools, not necessarily French-speaking schools, but the schools that were very much following the Bourguibist model, they would rarely reference any type of Arabness, and it's perceived as being very much, for inferior, social classes. And no, we're not Arabs, we're Tunisians, and we're Mediterranean, and that whole, exaltation of Méditerranée. When like other people I know would very much reference being an Arab, sometimes being pan-Arab, before anything else, and that belonging to the whole Arab world, like they call it, although I have a problem with that type of generalization. So I think it's very much a class marker and also a generational marker, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would echo Yasmin's analysis. I think she perfectly described that Tunisianness, which I personally affected with, because I, as someone with a very complex identity, I always get confused about my identity whenever I travel. So I think it's part of a deep identity crisis that Tunisia has been struggling with since the formation of the Tunisian state under Bourguiba, which was mimicked in some ways to the Ataturk republic, but less nationalistic, I have to say. When you talk about Tunisianness and how it has been constructed by being everything except for being African, that's very telling about how de-Africanized Tunisia has been since, at least, since 1957, when the Tunisian Republic, has become the model of inclusion and assimilation of all Tunisians. In my presentation, I talked about cordial racism, which is a term I borrowed from the Brazilian context, where Brazil was willing to build some kind of racial democracy, very much in the same line as South Africa's Rainbow Nation, and that's something that can bear resemblance to how Tunisia was post Bourguiba Tunisia, or post independence Tunisia was able to build this Tunisianness on different very thin identities, whether Arabness, Mediterranean, whatever that means, a little bit of Africanness, but not sure what African means. And with most conservative Tunisians, using of Islam as a marker of equality, that in some ways invisibilized, Black Tunisians as not being, let's say, probably less Tunisian because they don't look Muslim Arab enough. So there is this very big confusion there, and in a lot of Black, in a lot of non-Black people, whether in Tunisia or abroad, when they see someone who looks black, but they don't necessarily identify as Tunisian because they have always been invisible. And I mean, when I talk to my black Tunisian friends who have traveled outside of Tunisia, they always get confused and even, you know, denied their Tunisianness. It happened to me when I was in Lebanon. I was confused for an Eritrean maid because I wasn't unfortunately for them white enough to be considered Tunisian, even by some Lebanese academics. Probably less so in Turkey because there's this kind of exotization of black people in Turkey. It's only in the West where this question of Tunisianness, at least, you know, is not asked. And probably I'm luckier because I live in English-speaking country, Canada, where Tunisianness is not, or Tunisia is not as prominent, let's say, in public discourse, because except of course for after 2011 when Tunisian revolution has put Tunisia in the map, but now it has been eclipsed. But again, there's a lot of the discourse on Tunisians. There's a lot of there's some kind of, I call it epistemic violence with the denial of race and racism in Tunisia by silencing black Tunisian activists from using the term race or racism in talking about, you know, discrimination that has been meted against them. I know that I have talked a little bit too long, but I wanted to just to focus on how this concept of Tunisianness is very thin and it's very elusive, you know, to kind of be able to define it properly. Thank you.
I would just add that there's at least a moment in this 1960s and a little bit into the 1970s where some leftist Tunisians are advocating for Tunisia's place on the African continent. And this is in the context of when they're thinking about third worldism and sort of Afro-Asian solidarity. And we might want to think about that. I mean, it's complicated. I don't think that their embrace of an African identity means an embrace of blackness, right? It still is a sort of colored hierarchy. And for some people, Tunisia is supposed to take a leading role, right? That has some of these civilizing hierarchies embedded in it. But, you know, around the time of the Pan-African Festival in Algiers in 1969, and again, at various moments over the 60s, there are Tunisian activists who do talk even in very superficial terms about Tunisia as being part of Africa.
Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, at some point, since when Bourguiba, of course, you know, it's celebrated by a lot of people in Tunisia and even elsewhere by being the father of Tunisian, I'm sorry, of Francophonie, along with Léopold Sédar Senghor. And there's this anecdote about, you know, Bourguiba talking about Senghor as being too white to be black, something like that, you know, because of the way that, you know, I mean, it's a very kind of Fanonian type of, I mean, racial politicization of blackness as being too white to be considered black and being too black to be considered white. And that is telling, of course, you know, about the Francophonie as a post-colonial, neo-colonial project that became, you know, a sticking rod for France, you know, to continue its domination in the continent, but also the discourse on race that has been totally erased in the name of the Republican universal values, and which Tunisia has been mimicking. You know, I mean, post independence, Tunisia has been mimicking since 1957, under using, of course, Islam as well. You know, in order to kind of dilute this whole debate on race and racism. And thanks to 2011 revolution, these issues have resurfaced, but you know, without any conflict, of course. You know, especially Tunisians are also more conservative ones. So it's something in progress that is not going to end anytime soon. Thank you.
So we just have one more question, and I think we'll end with that. The question is in regards to negotiating positionality while doing research. So how do you negotiate your positionality during research? Martha, would you want to say something because you haven't said
Yeah,
anything?
maybe I'm just, can you hear me? I'm just like answering quickly the previous question, and then I will just make a comment on positionality, because like I can talk about the classificatory slave descendants, and their Arabness and Arab origin are like analytically distinct. So Arabness is not questioned, especially because, probably because there was also this struggle to include them, no, in the post-independence period, to erase like racial differences. But Arab origin is something which is not present, and it's very clear that it is not present because they come from a past of slavery. So it's clearly recognizable from the lineage name that they are not Arab, like by origin. And this is at the basis of their racialization. But Muslimness is something different, I noticed, because being a self-ascription and an ascription, like Black people there are like they are considered to be less pious, because there is this overlapping of Blackness and coming from outside, so from the pagan world, no? So there is, I think, an overlapping of these transcultural constructions like I was talking about, so crime, inclination to stealing and raping, but there is also this idea that being exogenous, so being not Arab, means also being not like good Muslims, like not pious Muslims. And this is something they really suffer from. This is something I noticed. And they try to make up for that, like by being very orthodox, like by wearing like long beards. Like when I arrived there were like 2 mosques, and then when I left, there were like 5 mosques. Everybody was building mosques. And so there is also a gender meaning attached to this idea, because there is a connection somehow from the from the pre-abolition figure of concubine, from the post-abolition figure of prostitute to today's Black women. And this is something we are all very familiar with. When we talk to Black women, they're always complaining of being harassed on the street. Like there is this perception that they are sexually available more than white women. So this is very far from being a good Muslim, of course, like being a prostitute. So there is this kind of, but of course it's a very like context specific idea. And about my positionality, when I arrived, I was very like invisible, because everybody was thinking that I was Tunisian. But then talking to people there, I understood, and it was very clear for me that my race came mainly from my passport, so from the institutional level. So when I was saying, but I'm not that different from you, and they were saying like, but your passport is red. So that's the color of the passport, which makes the difference, you know, the racial difference. I'm leaving the floor to someone else.
Yeah, that's interesting, Martha. Thank you. I think on positionality, that's something that talks to me a lot, because I am not too Black to be considered Black. I'm not too white to be considered white. So because I have this kind of mixed race, Black Tunisianness, when people approach me, of course, in Tunisia, when I say, you know, proud that I'm Black Tunisian, because I have always been Black because I was raised in the South, people, they get really shocked. It's like, but you're not too Black, you know, or you're not this. And this is something that I also witnessed when I was living in Libya and covering the Libyan conflict, and also seeing how Libya probably is much more diverse than Tunisia. While being in the south of Libya, I was considered almost white because the majority of the Tibu tribes, who are Black Libyans of sub-Saharan African descent, but they're indigenous Black Libyans, sorry. But also there was this kind of positionality at the time as a researcher and journalist on how I have to navigate these different racial categorizations, and I have to live with that, you know, with the fact that, you know, I can never be enough for all categories, you know, for everyone, because of how this racial discourse in Tunisia is still, it's something very very alien. And I can understand sometimes why they think this is a Western ploy to sow division in Tunisia, because it's something very South African very American. It cannot be Tunisian. It cannot be Republican, even in France. When talking about race is something that is imported, from the West. Again, I mean, there is a component of conspiracy theory where when this discourse on race and is discussed, after, especially, I mean, particularly after whether Black Lives Matter or Me Too, and it puts the researcher sometimes in a very tough position on why on the motives for doing that. I mean, I would add a layer to my positionality as a woman who wears the headscarf, which I think it's also very problematic as well, because Tunisia has been marketed as Tunisian women, at least marketed abroad, as very light-skinned, and not covered, and so that also problematizes, the researcher or someone like myself, when trying to talk about something that doesn't relate to my to my persona as a Muslim woman. So it's something that confuses a lot of people, and I think it's unfortunate that this is something that is not discussed in Tunisian academia. It's very, very marginal, and we have always to do it, in Western academia, because it's something that talks about how countries in the MENA are still struggling, to break this taboo about, race as something that is not to be ignored. It's there, but this can only be achieved, and at least from my research, through democratic transition. Why? Because if Tunisia didn't transition to democracy, these issues will never be talked about. Never, because of how authoritarian regimes, will try to keep, these very sensitive issues, under the carpet, because it's very political. And we talk about racial politics and how the construction of race has been politicized, by different post-independence, leaders, whether Bourguiba or Ben Ali. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
So we have been asked to wrap up here. I want to thank each and every panelist here for sort of adding to this fantastic discussion. Thank you to the participants. Thank you for your questions and your curiosity. And of course, I mean, if you have personal questions, like if you want to reach out to us, I'm totally fine. Email us, write to us. We are there. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya. Thanks, Benedict.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.